Hi everyone, this is Tommy from Studio Ultra Mega with another Operation Battle Ready tutorial, episode 42, Night Vision. Today's mission is to try to make this model look like it is being viewed under night vision while it's firing a gun. Okay, so we're gonna start off by whipping out the old airbrush. We've got some scale 75 artist acrylics sap green, and we're going to use some of that scale 75 thinner right there in the old Owada Eclipse. And out of those little tubes, I just use a nasty old brush to get a dollop on there. Go ahead and stir it up right there in the airbrush. Yeah, airbrushing isn't really my bag. This is just going to be some simple, like what you see a lot of people do with zenithal highlighting. I don't like using primer for that at all, and I'm just as good when I need zenithal effects. Go ahead and starting to lay the base color down with an airbrush right over the old black primer there. And so this whole airbrush step is just to create a kind of a zenithal overall lighting that for the night vision effect would just reflect the light of the moon or any general lights or overhead lights, no matter how faint they are at night. That's what the night vision picks up. Okay, so if you notice as we go through the airbrushing here, it's always going to be from the top pointing down towards the base, and I'm just trying to make sure that any big flat edges and areas visible from the top of the model are getting hit. Not only am I okay with this green hitting the base, because it's gonna serve to be the base's paint job, the underlying base colors for it, I'm also gonna get a good base of it down here along the outer edge of the base, because we're actually at the end of this model we're gonna go ahead and do the firing arc for the model right in here as part of the painting process. Now we're going to start to build up the brightness on the screen. We're going to use some of the scale 75 white. You see I still got that base green clinging into the bottom of the airbrush there. And I add a little bit more thinner and a little dollop of the white. There we go. That's still a little thick for me. You see how it's clinging to the side of the airbrush there? I want that to be kind of like falling off the edge of the airbrush wall there naturally. So I add a little bit of water. It's just clean water from a cup off to the side. Stir that up in there until it's the consistency I want. So it's time to go brighter, do the next layer up of highlights here on this zenithal base coat. So I add more thinner and even more white and bring this really light green up a level. Okay, so here is our zenithal base coat, based on general overhead ambient light at night. If you notice, this is kind of more of a grayish green than I'm really enjoying. So that's where the magic of the ghost tints comes in. We're going to change the tone of this green, but actually the hue of this green. So, but the first thing first is I'm going to take some of this ghost tint green, which is a very dark foresty green, and we're going to reinforce the dark areas of the model. And I'm going to go through and kind of use it to, if you remember the old method of black lining, it still gets used every once in a while. Black lining, we're going to kind of do the same. We're going to go and reinforce the lines and details with the green ghost tint. And as you'll see, we're not going to just wash it over the top because we don't want to make it brighter. We're going to paint those lines in, you know, with a ghost tint. It's going to flow through there real nice, like nicer than a GW wash or anything. Now that I've gone and reinforced all the shadows on the model and the details on the upper half that's illuminated, I'm going to go through and using that exact same mix that was in my airbrush. I'm just going to take some of that and reinforce some of the highlights on the very upper level surfaces of the model. Okay, so now we're gonna fix this hue that we don't like. It's a little bit closer. It's kind of pastel almost, and we want to get it back to a more vibrant green. We're not going to use the green ghost tint because there's no way to get that green, which is already a very dark forest green, to actually get brighter. You can make paints lighter, you can't make them brighter. So we're gonna go back a step and mix our own green out of their blue and yellow. It's a little bit of plasma fluid, which is a nice bright blue ghost tint. And you see there, we're still very blue. I just mix it and test it, mix it and test it. I keep adding a little bit more yellow. Right there, that little bit of white, that was just a tiny hint of basic matte medium. Matte medium will actually lighten a color when it comes to these washes. And then I start adding more and more yellow in until I hit the more vibrant kind of lime green that I'm looking for. Now when we did the dark green, we weren't being sloppy with it, but we did use it as a wash. We wanted it to get into recesses. We don't really want this gathering anywhere, so we're going to apply it as a thin glaze. And the practical difference there is just that we're painting it on thinly and we're not letting it pool anywhere. Okay, so now we've completed the kind of zenithal base coat we were looking for. The model's still fairly dark now though after all that ghost tinting, so now we're gonna, with the actual painting part of the process, we're gonna bring those extreme highlights up and get that cool night vision look. We're gonna be using sap green, spring green, and white, and we're gonna just work off of gradients of those and build those highlights up to the focal points we want to look most illuminated with our object source lighting with no object. I don't know if there's a word for that. I'm not going to model the muzzle flash. I've never seen that done well. I remember like Armorcast or someone used to make little muzzle flashes that you could glue on the ends of your guns. I never approved. But here where we need it for the effect, we're just going to imagine the bright flash at the tip of that gun, and imagine that there's a light bulb right in front of it, and that's going to serve as our imaginary source in our object source lighting. You can see the effect really starting to take shape now as we start to build up highlights on those front-facing surfaces that look like if you had placed a light bulb right in front of that gun barrel, that those surfaces would get brightly illuminated. Okay, so as we start to favor those as we build up in our gradient highlights, the effect starts to come together. So I've done about a dozen of these guys so far, and one of the things that really makes the effect look cool is taking anything that might have a little ambient light to it, like all their goggles and glasses, I imagine, have little heads-up displays in them and such. Making those all super bright, almost whitish green, really makes them look illuminated, especially on models where like the faces are shadowed because of the poses. It looks really cool. So that's part of the project I enjoy. Any little lights on the armor, face plates, visors, making those like super bright really helps with the vibe and the look. Alright, so doing this extreme night vision look with all these dark shadowed areas doesn't necessarily mean ignoring those areas. Okay, so we are going to go through and also highlight a lot of those main edges and details, even in the shadowed areas. We're just going to keep it muted. So they don't become the star of the show all of a sudden. You don't want to hit those highlights just as hard because that will diminish your OSL look, right? Like if all those lights are hitting just as bright further away from the source, it destroys the illusion of having a source. So in the shadows, we're still highlighting all that stuff. We're just keeping it minimal and muted. Okay, we've about wrapped up the highlights on this trooper, and we are going to begin setting up to do the fire arc and the base. Okay, now we already have that darker green on the front of the base that we had there from the very beginning, and now I'm just going to take that really light highlight color and just do a general fade from that dark green along the general sides of the model. I mean, obviously I want the front arc pointing where he's shooting, and you see there I've just got that green. It's really, I just eyeballed up on the sides of the model, leaving the darker green visible in the front. I'm just putting out some of the scale 75 black. You saw me put out a little thinner, which I'm using here to get it at a nice consistency. And now what I'm going to do is black out the edge of not the base, but the base topper. We've got a little base topper on there. This is a step you could ignore if you had a base that didn't have this extra level of separation here from the base. I just think it looks nice. When it's possible, it helps separate the firing arc from the rest of the artwork. Now we're going to get out our handy dandy firing arc gauge. Picked this one up from Broken Egg Games, I believe at Adepticon one year. I think they were handing them out. But regardless, we're going to put that on the front of the base, protecting the firing arc. And then we're going to black out the second half of the base. We're going to use some nice thin black with some good flow to it. Here we're just kind of making sure that the front is exactly the front where we want it. And then we mark that with the black to cut off the front of the firing base. Sometimes when you do this, those lines will be a little crooked. There you go. Sometimes those lines will be a little crooked. You just have to make sure that you keep them as straight as possible. Because if you have to straighten them out, you could end up costing yourself degrees of firing arc. So be careful with that. Now we're just going to black out the back half of this base, leaving that front bar of green with the highlighted edges exposed. Okay, so now that base is just a little more pastel than I'm comfortable with. So again, we're going to come up with our bright green glaze that we used earlier. It's probably not going to be as bright because we're talking about the base, not the head and shoulders of the model. And we're just going to give the base a quick glaze to bring the hue back in line with the rest of the model. A note on these ghost tints from Air that they are glossy. But I don't care. I matte varnish all the way through painting a model. So I use it to protect areas and stuff like that all the time. So just matte it out with a good matte varnish, and ghost tints are one of your best friends. And there you have it, a trooper being observed through night vision. I would like to take a moment to thank all of our patrons over at Patreon that make these videos possible. Without you guys, there just is not the time or resources. So I appreciate that, and I hope you found this tutorial both informational and entertaining. And if you would be so kind, please like and subscribe.